Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to be talking about some strategies for successful partnering. My name is Antoinette Lowry and I'm the Business Development Manager for the US Midwest and Canada at Life Science Nation. And I'm joined by my colleague, Joey.
Hi everyone, my name is Joey Wall. I am an investor research analyst at Life Science Nation. I manage our relationship and network with investors, and I also do Hong Kong business development.
Just before we begin, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, to drop them in the Q&A or the chat box, and we'll try to answer them throughout or at the end. So today's topic is going to be strategies for successful partnering, which we believe is a very important topic, especially for preparation leading up to our RESI conference. But the strategies that we're going to talk about today can actually be applied for any conference or fundraising campaign. So we do believe we have a lot of value to share when it comes to this topic. So just a quick intro on Life Science Nation. We've been around for 10 years and we started off as a data company. We have two databases. We have an investor database, and a buy side company business development database. The investor database is a great tool that we fully curate here at Life Science Nation, with chock full of information on investors and what specifically they're looking for, so that we can then produce it to our startup network so that they can find their global target list of investors and begin their outreach campaign. The business development database is great for strategic partners looking for partners to get involved with, or for startup companies to kind of get a competitive analysis of what's going on within their market. And then we also, Life Science Nation produces the RESI conferences. We have RESI conferences 5 times a year. We start in January, March, June, September, and then November. We have been virtual since 2020, and we are very excited to be back in person in Boston this September for our first in-person conference post-pandemic. And RESI is a great tool and really important in the early stage life science industry. Our goal is to put startups in conversation with investors so they can get through their funding rounds and meet investors that are a good fit for them. And then we also offer some help with branding and messaging for startup companies. So helping them get their story straight and being able to have conversations with investors that lead to more conversations with that investor. And we really do focus on trying to bridge the gap between like the scientific conversations and the finance conversations so that they're productive and can lead to future collaboration. Okay, so let's talk about fundraising and the types of investors to get in front of. In the early stages of life science fundraising, there are many options today that were not available just a few years ago. Basically, it's just new players who have come onto the market, and Joey will be covering this more in depth later on. But in the past, there were very few options for early stage companies like family offices and angels. And VCs were very difficult to find, but today there are many other options, including strategic partners, VCs, big pharma, big med tech. All these players have totally changed the landscape of investors in the early stage life sciences. RESI is really unique due to 2 factors. One is the focus on early stage companies and investments and the nature of the investors who attend. Here's a logo splash of some investors who have attended RESI in the past, and we're expecting to have around 350 investors at the RESI Boston event this September. When you're an early stage company fundraising, it's important to think about all the different steps that you will be following and the preparations you'll need for each stage of your fundraising campaign. We're going to focus a little on getting your branding and messaging and marketing collateral ready, and how to access investors and how to get those initial meetings. So where should you look for the right lists of investors to get your global target market? Many sources include doing a Google search, and you can read about industry publications. You can look at companies that are similar to yours and who their investors have been in the past. You can also use LinkedIn. That's a great source. And databases. And I'm going to show you an example of a powerful database for identifying investors. And using LinkedIn and Google are very effective tools, but they're very time consuming. So what we've tried to do is kind of eliminate that by collecting all information for you to make a good choice on whether an investor is a fit for you or not. So I'm just going to exit out really quick and do a quick little demo here of our investor database. So this is the search page for the investor database. It is a global database, so we do track companies from all around the world. As you can see here, they come from all over. Most of them come from the United States, but we do have a good presence in Korea, Japan, Israel, really from all over. We also track 10 different types of investors, which again, Joey will talk about a little bit more in depth in a little. But you can specifically look at just angel investors if you wanted, which is a nice feature and search tool on this database. And then the investment interest box is where we get a little more specific to your company. So filling out information so that we can find a targeted list of investors who are going to be a good fit for you. So let's just do a rough example here. We'll do therapeutics. With subsectors in drug delivery and the indication preference. Let's try oncology. And let's say we're preclinical in phase 1. All right, so we'll run this search and see what we get. So based on these filters, there's over almost 700 companies here that you could look through. So a pretty great list. Filled with tons of information. So let's show you an example of what one of these mandate profiles looks like. Okay, so once you click into the profile, this is what you'll see, 3 tabs up at the top, investor, mandate, and contacts. Under the investor tab, you'll see pretty general information on the company. And then under mandate is where you'll get more specific to what these investors are looking for. So the sectors and subsectors interest is really filled with information specifically on what they're looking for. So they prefer to invest in platform technologies that have attained significant preclinical proof of concept data. So again, just a great tool to find some information. I always like to highlight this company and management team requirements section. I think it's great to know what you're getting into before you do. And then lastly, our golden ticket in the database is this message from investor. So this has an email specifically who to reach out to and what materials they would like to see. There's also a contacts tab with a few more people you could reach out to. And just a couple of little filters, features I always like to point out is you can save the search. You can also download everything into an Excel format for your own records as well. All right, I'm gonna pass the mic over to Joey now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony. So yeah, as you're putting together your global target list of investors, you obviously want to do your search like Tony just did based on your technology and your stage of development, just to make sure that you are a good fit for the investors. There are many tools out there that can help you do that. But before that, there needs to be more to it than that. When you are figuring out your global target list, because you don't just want you to be a fit for the investors, you also want to make sure that the investors are a good fit for you. So there are many types of investors out there, and each type operates pretty differently from each other. So really understanding how each specific type of investor works and how they might impact you in the future, in the long run, is very important when you are considering reaching out to an investor. So on our next slide, a type of investors that we very commonly see as the angel investors. Sometimes they can be individual angels that invest their own money. Other times they would come together very commonly as an angel group and they will make investment decisions together. So for angel groups, their members will gather periodically to have companies come pitch to them. They will review companies as a group, but each individual members will make their own investment decision on a certain company. So they don't necessarily invest all in the same deal. So some angel groups might have a fund that they set up, but in most cases, they will select deals as a group and then individually decide if the company is a fit. So angels usually invest earlier and in smaller amounts. As a group, they might be able to invest in larger amounts in the millions, but you won't see angel groups invest much more than that. Angel groups also syndicate with other groups pretty often on many deals. So in that way, they can, it's possible for them to participate in larger rounds. Yeah, so because angels invest their own money, they tend to be more flexible in investment and exit strategy. They could be willing to invest long run, or they could also be willing to invest closer to an exit. So it really depends on the individual sometimes. And angels can be both financially and philanthropically motivated. They can invest, usually they invest pretty early, but they can invest anywhere from seed to venture stage. And oftentimes, you'll see that angel groups are focused pretty regionally. They will tend to focus on the area where the groups are based. But for larger groups that have regional chapters or even chapters internationally, they might come together on a more global scale for some deals. Yeah, and next slide, we have venture capital. So these are the more traditional, the bulk part of investing. So VCs raise funds for multiple outside parties. They usually have a strict or limited time frame for investing and for exit because they are liable to their LPs in terms of their fund structure. So that's one thing that you should definitely keep in mind of when you're reaching out to VCs. The size of VCs can really vary. So there are a lot of new emerging and micro VCs out there now. So they have a smaller fund. They invest very early stage, so pre-seed to seed stage, and usually in smaller amounts. So say hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars range. And there's also some very large VCs out there that manage like $500 million fund, and they will be able to write much larger check size from a couple of millions to tens of millions. So the investment size of VCs can really vary. And for those larger VCs, they could invest in later stage as well. So anywhere from seed, venture to even growth stage, depending on the firm. VCs are generally more financially motivated comparing to other types of investors. We've encountered VC that has some sort of impact mission before. So for example, there is a firm that focused on childhood cancer. But in most cases, VCs are very financially motivated and they would focus a lot on the return of investment. Yep, so family office. So family office is the type of investors that are least known among all the others, and they tend to keep a low profile, but they're really great to have as investors. So generally, family offices manage funds on behalf of one or more families or individuals. So there are singular family offices and there are multiple family offices. There is just a huge variation in investment size depending on the firm, and they are generally more flexible in terms of exit strategy. So many family offices now are getting more and more into direct transactions. So a lot of time you will see that family offices tend to be fund of funds because sometimes they don't have enough personnel in place to source deals or do their own due diligence. But that has been changing, and we've been seeing a lot of family offices getting into direct transaction and invest directly. Family offices can be philanthropically motivated, especially if there is a personal interest in a certain areas. They could also be strategically or financially motivated. It really depends on the firm. Then, like I mentioned, they tend to be more flexible in investment strategies because they are accountable to less LPs, especially when you're comparing to VCs, which tend to have a more strict set of investment strategy, and they will stick to it throughout the whole fund. Family offices are much more flexible, especially if there is a personal interest in a certain areas. And they're only answerable to themselves. So that's the case for family offices. Yeah, moving on, we have corporate venture capital. So corporate venture capital, it's a thing that has been growing a lot. You see now a lot of strategics and large corporations have been setting up their own dedicated venture arm in the recent years. So it's been growing a lot. And it's not only the strategics that we commonly think of, like large pharma or med tech. It can also be hospital systems or insurance companies, or even large tools and services companies. They could also have their own corporate venture capital. So there are a lot of different types of corporate venture capitals out there. So corporate venture capital, CVCs, invest funds on behalf of the company. They only have one single LP, which is their corporation. Some CVCs have their own dedicated funds. Others will invest off their company's balance sheet. So their fund structures and exit strategy can be different based on that. Some CVCs are strategically motivated. They will only look at companies or technologies that have strategic alignment with their corporations. Others can be just financially motivated, and they will invest more broadly in a certain space. So CVC is a type of investors that you really need to do your homework on before reaching out to them, because there is just such a broad range of strategies within the same type of investors. So for example, if you are speaking with someone who only invests strategically to their corporations, you should think about things like, well, is there going to be a partnership down the road, or would a acquisition from the corporation partner eventually would be a possibility eventually. So yeah, things like this you should always consider when approaching and speaking with corporate venture capitals. And generally speaking, corporate venture capitals tend to look more globally, especially if they are a large strategic and they're looking for opportunities for the corporations. They can look anywhere in the world. They can invest anywhere from early to late, the seed, venture, and growth stage are all possible. Yep, venture philanthropy, or impact investing, however you want to call them. So foundation and endowments are definitely more known for non-dilutive grant funding, but it's becoming more and more common that foundation endowments are setting up their own venture fund and they start to invest directly. So they could do both equity and grant. And of course, they are philanthropically motivated. And generally speaking, they will only invest in the areas of interest for the foundation. So for example, if this foundation is set up for a certain disease, then they will only invest in companies or technologies that are related to that certain diseases. So they will have a relatively focused area, a strict focus area per se. Venture philanthropy tends to look globally. They are definitely a growing group of investors that is gaining more and more interest in direct investments. So strategic partners. So strategic partners can be any large corporation that partner with early stage companies. Most commonly, this can be a big pharma or large med tech groups, but it could also be companies that are doing tools and services like Lonza or Allergen. It could even be insurance companies. So for example, some insurance company can be looking for digital health technology to improve their services. So they're willing to partner with early stage companies for that. So when you're thinking about strategic partners, don't just limit yourself to big pharma or med tech. It could be any company or any large corporation that's willing to partner with early stage companies. So usually strategic partners doesn't do equity investment. They usually go for other deal structures like co-development, milestone-based payment, or in licensing. And generally, they will be partnering strategically for their current or near future strategy. So for some company, if they are looking to expand to a certain areas, but they don't necessarily have the expertise in-house, they will consider partner with external companies or early stage company externally for that. So that's strategic partners. Yeah, so when you're looking at when you're looking at investor profile, you obviously investor type is something that you need to keep in mind of when you're considering reaching out. But there are some other things that you want to pay attention to when selecting the right investor to reach out to. So a good place to start is to look at the investors' sectors interest. What are the sectors or subsectors that they're interested in investing in? And is there any specific modalities or indications that they prefer to look at? Some investors will have a really broad mandate. They will invest in anything. They were pretty optimistic, or they are sector agnostic. So they have a broad mandate, but we also encounter many investors who are very specific in their investment interest. So these are things that you definitely want to know before reaching out. Yeah, and then investment size and stage is also something to consider. So you want to make sure you know that whether an investor expects you to reach a certain stage or have a certain amount of data. So maybe some investors will like to see a prototype, or others will like to see a first in human. So these are things that you want to know before, like if you have that before you're reaching out. And for investment size, it probably doesn't make sense to reach out to an investor who will only invest, like, let's say 200K if you're raising a 10 million round, because they're just not getting a big enough piece with the investment. And conversely, if you're raising a small round, an investor who has a really large check size would probably not be so relevant for you. So yeah, and geographic exposure. Some investors will only invest in a certain region. It is especially true when you are looking at angel groups, but it's also true for some VC as well, for some smaller VC as well. So yeah, that's something that you want to pay attention to when you're reaching out to an investor. And investor requirements. So this could be anything from whether an investor would require a board seat or observer seat. Some investors would like to see a certain LIP position. We also know personally that some investors would prefer founders or management teams that have experience in the past or have successful track record in the past. Others are more open to work with first-time founders, first-time entrepreneurs. So it really depends on investors. But these are very helpful information to have when before you reach out to a certain investor. Yeah, and these are all information that we keep in our investor profile from our LSN investor databases. So we thought that these are very important information to have and very helpful for your outreaching.
Yeah, and not only is it helpful to have, it can be really hard to find sometimes too. So what we try to do with the database and the RESI conference is make this information available to you so that you can easily identify what investors you want to reach out to and who will be a good fit for you. So now we're going to talk about getting ready for a partnering conference. Thank you, Joey, for all of that. So just a reminder of the different elements of marketing collateral that are important for fundraising. We talked earlier about the importance of being able to tell your story and how we can help you do that when you're talking to investors. And these are ways to tell your story. So starting with your logo, your elevator pitch, up to your website or an animated video, if that's something that you're interested or have a vision for. They're not all necessary for partnering conferences, but they are materials that you do want to be thinking about and developing when preparing. For the conference, we give you the opportunity to upload both your executive summary and your pitch deck to your profile through the partnering platform. Your executive summary should not be longer than 2 pages. This is an example here. And another very effective document that we call a tier sheet or a 1-pager. And that is a data sheet about the investment opportunity. And here is an example of that as well. Investors really like this. It's easy for them to navigate this format. And these are a few examples. As you can see, one has a few more images and graphics, which we think is a little more visibly attractive for investors, and they find it a little more effective than just a lot of heavy text. We'll also be sharing this deck with you guys so you can get a look at this. The pitch deck is an important piece of marketing collateral, but can be very challenging for some companies to know what relevant information to include without being too long. We see this a lot with those who have a science background, who tend to get a little heavy on the technical details of the technology, but that is not really the objective of these investor decks. We think that it should be 10 to 12 slides, and you should be able to condense the highlights of your company into that amount of slides. If your deck is looking at 20 to 30 slides, you definitely want to rethink that and reformat and be a little more concise, because we've seen and we've heard that investors don't tend to look at the decks if they're longer than that. So they're missing a lot of valuable information that could be condensed into something smaller. So let's move on to strategies for successful partnering and how we make that available to you at the RESI conference. So when you register, you get access to the partnering platform, and that is going to open on Monday, August 29th for the September conference. You're able to create a profile for your company, and you want to make sure your information is clear and concise as possible, so investors reviewing your profile can understand what your technology does. You can upload the following: a logo, website, investor deck, and executive summary, as I mentioned. There are also some other sections in your profile where you can give more information on your company status, stage of development, etc. I know that there's a box about your management team. You can highlight them. There's a lot of information that you can provide. So once you've identified your investors to reach out to and begin your outreaches, you want to be very convincing in your first message. And here's what we think you need to include in your introduction to yourself, your company, concrete information on your fundraising campaign, how much you're trying to raise, how much you've already raised. All of this information, investors are interested in learning about your company. And if you also customize your message as well by doing some research online and incorporate that, you'll make your message more powerful. And here is an example of a meeting request message. So you can get an idea of what the length should look like and what the style is. And again, we'll be sharing this with all of you, this slide deck, so you'll be able to view that a little more in depth so you can diligently craft your own message. So to get a lot of meetings, you need to send out a lot of requests. Companies that send out less than 20 meetings, or sorry, companies that send out less than 20 requests get 2 to 3 meetings, you can see. And then those who send closer to 100 meeting requests will get closer or over 20 meetings booked. So we've definitely seen that, the more effort you're putting in and the more companies you're reaching out to, the more meetings that you're getting. It's also really important to send out follow-up messages. So once you send out your initial messages, and if you didn't hear back from some companies that you think would be a really good fit for you, it's important to send out those follow-ups. We do recommend sending out at least 3. Here we have kind of drafted up a little outline for 4 and what each message should include. So in your first follow-up, you should really focus on your technology. Your second follow-up should focus more on your market. Third should focus on key management, so players in your team. And then fourth follow-up, you can send that tier sheet by email, or if possible, or you can send a link. So another great aspect of RESI is the Innovator's Pitch Challenge. And the way we run the Innovators Pitch Challenge is we have changed our format just a little, but we will have a few sessions, and there'll be 4 companies in each session. They'll have a 4-minute pitch, followed up by 10 minutes of live Q&A. Our investor research team works really hard to put together a panel of relevant investor judges so that when you're pitching to an investor who is interested in your company and not interested in another, indication. They'll be relevant. Your company gets featured through the live agenda, and when your logo gets clicked, it'll bring you to your dedicated landing page, which looks like this. And this is where investors can book a meeting with you right from there if they're interested. And they'll be able to view materials such as your pitch video, your slide deck, your executive summary. There's like a company description up here, and then the contact information as well. So like I mentioned, the key takeaway for getting meetings is, directly proportional to the effort that you're putting in. So I have said this to my clients before, you can't just send out one round of messages and expect all of those investors to get back to you and confirm meetings with you. I've even done campaigns for clients myself, and I've seen it where the more you're following up with them and providing more information on your company, the more they're interested and want to meet with you.
Great. So now that, let's say you have a lot of meeting booked and it's time that you start to prepare for them, we have some tips and tricks on how you can prepare to meet with an investor. And this could also be applied to when you're preparing to pitch to the investor and answer their questions too. So when you are preparing for an investor meeting, it's important that you do your homework ahead of time. So you want to understand the firm's mission and really get to know what they're looking for in the space. So besides looking at their website or the LinkedIn of the firm, which is quite obvious, look at their portfolio companies and what they have invested in the past. This can usually give you a pretty good sense of what is the type of company they're looking for in the space and what is their investment interest. So that's definitely something that you should consider. And so besides the firm, you also want to read about the people, especially the ones that you'll be speaking with or meeting with at the meeting. So a lot of the firm will have the bio of their team members on their website. So that's a good place to start. And you could also look at their LinkedIn. Another thing you could do is that if the person that you're speaking with has spoke on any event or if they're speaking on some panels before, definitely spend some time to take a look at that as well, so you can get to know the person better. And if you notice that the person that you'll be speaking with comes from like a deep technical background, or if they have any scientific expertise in the space that your technology is in, be prepared that you might encounter some, like scientific or technology related questions from them. So the key takeaway is to really get to know your audience, not just the firm, but also the person that you'll be speaking with ahead of time. So for your investor meetings, we definitely recommend having at least 2 attendees from your companies at the meeting. So one person would be the main person who will be running the meeting and doing all the talking, and the other person can be there to kind of facilitate the conversation and also to take notes. And this is very important, especially investors sometimes will require a certain piece of information or some documents during your conversation, and you definitely wanted to have that written down somewhere so you don't forget to follow up with them afterwards. And it's also very helpful to keep track of the conversation you had, what has been discussed and what has not been discussed, and if whether there is a certain areas that the investors have questioned on. These are very good things that you wanted to write down, and they can come in very handy when you need to follow up with investors, or if you're preparing for a follow-on meeting with the same investors. So going into this meeting, we definitely recommend you to plan for an initial presentation. At RESI, our meeting slots are 30 minutes. So we recommend having approximately 15 minutes presentation. but do leave a good amount of time for discussions and just answering questions without your slide deck. And we always suggest our company to just try to have a conversation with the investors. Don't try to fill all the time with your presentation. And what we found is that for companies who just sit and have a conversation very interactively and personally, conversation with the investors are the ones that have a better chance of doing a follow-up conversation. It really engages the investors and is just so much better than doing a presentation and running through the pitch deck. Because as you can imagine, at RESI, the investor will have lots of meetings throughout the day. So the ones that stick with them would definitely be the conversation that has a more personal and interactive touch to it. So yeah. And having backup slides at hand to address questions. So definitely do have some slides in the addendum in case you want to highlight a certain piece of data, or if you want to show them more about technology, for example, your MOA. So yeah, having backup slides is important. And yeah, you definitely want to ask the investor questions. And we are going to talk more about that in our next slides, I think. Yes, there we go. And so an investor meeting is not only the opportunity for the investor to get to know about you, your company, and your technology, it is also the opportunity for you to get to know the investor and to really determine if they will be a good fit for you and your company. So I've heard a lot of people say that getting an investment from someone is like marrying them. It's a long-term relationship that can last for many, many years. So you really want to determine, you really want to get to know who they are, and you need to determine whether you will be able to get along with them in the long run, because you will be dealing with them a lot. And this is very important because, as you can imagine, it's going to be very difficult for your company, especially a startup company, if there are frictions between the management team and the investors from the start. So yeah, so some questions that you should consider asking the investors in your meetings is that, for example, whether they will be adding value to you. So are they just pure financial investors, or would they be able to provide value? So do they have any connection in the space that can help you move forward? Do they have any expertise or experience in the space that you're working with? So that's a very important question to ask. And also, as we mentioned previously, the investor type could usually affect you in the long run. We already talked about this, so that's something that you want to clarify on. What requirements do they have? Do they want a board seat? Or do they expect you to exit in a certain period of time? This is especially relevant when you're speaking with a VC, because they do tend to have a relatively strict strategy on exit. Yeah, so the takeaway is that don't be afraid or don't hold back on asking any of these questions face to face to your investor during the meeting, because this will really help move things forward smoothly in the long run. And we think that the investors will also appreciate you clarifying all these hurdles in advance as well. So yeah, that's the end of our presentation, I believe. If you have any questions for us, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat box.
Yeah, there's a couple I'd like to address since we have a little time. So someone asked about when do you suggest sending out invites? What is the distribution of meetings arranged by day before RESI starts? So as I mentioned, we opened the partnering platform a few weeks before the conference begins. The date will be Monday, August 29th. And we recommend getting your first round of messages out on that day. I have done a few outreach campaigns for clients in the past, and I have every few days sent out messages and follow-up messages. So I would say every 3 to 4 days, considering it's only 2 weeks ahead of time. So making sure you're getting out those messages every few days to keep reaching out and book meetings. And do you want to add anything to that, Joey, or?
No, I think that's really good. What is the distribution of meetings arranged by day before RESI starts? Yeah, so I think for for the meetings, I think the system would just arrange meetings at the earliest convenience for both parties. Is that how it works?
Yeah. I mean, we definitely see a lot of activity and confirmed meetings taking place, you know, the week leading up to the conference. But the investor research team is really great about being on top of the investors and telling them to get in and confirm meetings and stuff. And then we start to see that number go up on our end. So, yeah. There are some questions about the slide deck. So yeah, we'll be sharing this with you guys after, and yes, this was recorded. So we'll be, this will probably be hosted on our RESI site soon, so you can review it. But I can also share it with you, Diana. And then someone asked about how many follow-up messages. So we did kind of talk about that. And we, you know, at least 3 after your initial message. We did highlight 4, and that's in here. Let me see if I can find that slide and what they should include. Oh, here we go. So your first follow-up should focus more on your technology, your second focusing on your market, your third follow-up focusing on key management team, and then your final follow-up is sending the tier sheet. So essentially 3 messages, and then the 4th would be the tier sheet. What are exact days and times the meetings can be scheduled? So the first 2 days, the September conference will be a hybrid conference. So the first 2 days will be in person, and then we'll have a virtual 3rd day. The 2 days of partnering on Wednesday and Thursday, I believe, start at 8 a.m. and go till 6 p.m. And then virtually on Friday, it'll run 24/7 on Friday. So if you do have a 1 day or that 3rd day, you want to make sure that you update your calendar to reflect the times that you're available. And just another thing, so you all know, we will be having some partnering tutorials after partnering opens, kind of going over the functions of partnering, how to navigate the system, set up your profile, set up your calendar, and add things. If you are diligent and do active outreach, you can expect anywhere between, I would say, like 6 and 15 meetings with investors. Would you agree, Joey, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it would also depend on, I guess, what kind of technology are you, or what sector do you fall under? Yeah, but that range is largely accurate, I would say.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, this is a great question. What is the best way to send follow-up messages to investors? Is there a broadcast method or send individually? So through the partnering platform, you would send them individually, the follow-up messages to each person, and your initial outreach as well. You would go through your investors, and then you can see who's registered under each company and send them each a message. We also keep the partnering platform open for a few weeks after the conference is over for follow-ups as well, so you can continue to send messages. And if you have or upgrade to Premier Partnering, which is an additional $500, you can get access to the investors' emails. So instead of messaging them through the partnering platform after the conference, you can shoot them an email that'll go directly to their inbox. Will investor groups reach out to us? Joey, do you want to answer that?
Yes, I would say yes. I think it's based on my experience, a lot of investors coming to RESI, they also do a lot of homework on the companies attending our conference as well. They would do a very thorough screening about the companies. So definitely, if you are a fit to them, I would expect some investor will reach out to you as well. So a short answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we see a little bit more outreach come from the startup company side, but there are definitely investors who know what they're looking for. So they're doing their side of the research too.
Definitely.
Will the company logos part of the pitch event be shared/announced on LinkedIn? Yes, we do announce all of our IPC participants as they've been accepted into the Innovators Pitch Challenge. And I also believe we've done a large logo splash with all of the finalists as well. That can be found on the Life Science Nation LinkedIn site. I think that's it for all the questions. There was one about the database and access to the database, so I can just quickly answer that. We do have 2 subscriptions. We have a year-long subscription that actually includes your registration fee and your pitch fee and gives you an upgrade to Premier Partnering. And we sell that for just under $7K, $69.90. You also have you have access to us with any issues throughout the time of your subscription. And if you need help kind of filtering investors to get your global target list, we'll help you with that as well. And then the other subscription is a 6-month subscription that does not include any registrations or pitch fee. It's just access to the database, and we sell that for $4K. We do allow 2 seats on each database, so you're able to review with your colleague. You can also share your searches with them, so you can both see what each other is looking at. It's a really great tool. And if you would like to learn more about the database or see a demo specific to your company, you can reach out to our resi@lifesciencenation.com email, and we'll be sure to set you up with the correct BD manager to show you a demo. All right, there's a question here. We have a little bit more time, so we can answer a few more. Are all investors attending in person?
Are all investors attending in person? So for our RESI Boston conference, as Tony mentioned, it's going to be a hybrid model. So the first 2 days going to be in person, and the last day is going to be virtually. So there is going to be an overlap where a lot of investors would attend both in person and virtually, but there are some investors that will only attend virtually as well. So yes and no.
So if you have a 3-day registration, you want to make sure that you're really participating on that 3rd day, so you're not missing out on a day of meeting with investors, because there will be a handful of them that will be doing virtual only, who might be a fit for you. So you want to make sure that you meet with them. How early is too early for a company to attend? We are in R&D stage for diagnostics, so I am not sure. I mean, that's a good question. We're focused on early stage. I mean, I think it's great to attend and meet people regardless and kind of start to network yourself. You know, you might not be in the best position to participate in the pitch challenge. It is full anyways, but you know, it's never a bad idea to meet with people and network and just kind of get comfortable talking to investors and also comfortable answering their questions. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things to take away from any meetings that you have with an investor is, you know, what types of questions are they asking, and am I comfortable answering them? The pitch presentation, someone asked how long the pitch presentation is. So the session is scheduled for an hour. There will be 4 pitching companies. They each have 4 minutes for their live pitch, followed by 10-minute Q&A from the investors.
So for our pitch sessions, all of the company will be required to submit a recorded pitch beforehand, and we will host your pitch video on our live agenda at our event. So, and then during the pitch, we wanted to give the most time to the interactive part, the Q&A between you and the investors. So you will have 4 minutes to pitch to investors, and the rest of the time will all be dedicated to Q&A, which I think a lot of companies find the most value in our IPC sessions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Q&A session is huge. Again, gets you really comfortable with answering those questions from investors and understanding what kind of questions investors are going to continue to ask of you when you meet with other groups. All right, so it looks like we answered all the questions, which was great. That was awesome. I haven't had that many questions in a presentation in a while, so
Yeah,
that
I know.
was good. Go through. But thank you everyone for your time this afternoon. Again, we will be sending out a follow-up message with the slide deck and the recording of today's video. If you have any other questions, feel free to email them to resi@lifesciencenation.com, and Joey or I or the appropriate person will get back to you. And we're looking forward to having you all in Boston this September. And yeah, thank you guys.